I noticed in this dossier that NATO had big involvement in cooperation from these actions. Can you explain us how?
Yes, exactly. So in every country, I will tell you about US in more detail, but the structure is very similar in all these countries. In Europe, it was, yes, coordinated through NATO. In the US, initially, when they just announced that there was some sort of a virus in China, for the first couple of weeks, there was no really, nothing was happening. And the advice that came from regulatory agencies or health agencies was, oh, well, just, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick. Masks are not useful, so you don't need to wear them. And so basically normal public health advice that's always been in place for the past, I don't know, several decades for any respiratory illness. If we have a season of respiratory illness in the winter that is a little bit worse than the previous year, then they would, come up with recommendations like this. And this is what's normal public health policy is. Now, and also these policies were documented in the US and all these other countries. They exist as written documents, what you do in an abnormal flu season. And so that's, again, people can check that. Now, sometime in mid-March of 2020, and this happened simultaneously in all these countries, and it's plus minus a couple of days, really. It's somewhere around second week in March. All of these previously existing public health policies were thrown out of the window, disregarded, and replaced with a completely different set of activities. And the organizational structures also changed dramatically. So in all of these countries, and in the US specifically, National Security Council was put in charge of COVID response policy. And that should give everyone a shock. So Debbie found that there was a document linked to New York Times article, and so she downloaded it from there. But in the US, they came up with a new document called Pandemic Action Plan Adapted, or PANCAPA, or PANCAP-A, something like that. So Adapted Pandemic Action Plan. And in this adapted plan, they had a different organizational structure where National Security Council was in charge of the policy. And National Security Council is an advisory body to U.S. President, which consists of military heads and intelligence heads, so Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then the intelligence agencies are part of the National Security Council, and their job is to advise President on war, issues of war, foreign diplomacy, and terrorism.
That means
it has nothing to do with public health.
That means that we were in war. We heard from the start that in some countries, generals were in charge for this pandemic, and that was very strange. How come that generals, what they have with public health? But it seems to that that was the proof from the start that military has a main role in making decisions. Exactly, politicians were made decisions to give military power to run this pandemic.
Exactly. So that organizational structure immediately told us that the U.S. government treated it as an act of war. But they didn't tell this to the public. Remember, to the public, they were lying for several years that this is a naturally evolved virus in China from wet market. And if you were even to suggest that this may be not a naturally evolved virus, you would immediately get kicked off any social media platform, which I was. I was completely banned on all kinds of platforms, including even PayPal at the time. Anybody who was speaking up at that time had the same experience. If you said, "Oh no, it's maybe not a naturally evolved virus," immediately you were suppressed and banned. And so they lied for several years. Now it's several announcements came, and it's apparently okay to discuss this as a bioweapon virus leak from Wuhan, the news came from the CIA and from a few other places that now it's okay to discuss. So you can discuss it on social media as a weaponized virus leak, or gain-of-function virus leak from Wuhan. Although that's also a false narrative, and I discuss it in my Substack why that's the case. But anyway, and still I just checked on NATO website. NATO has a CBRN, or Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear Weapons Task Force, And they're still saying that they somehow got involved in this COVID response, and they were heroes and such nice people that they helped all these nations in the COVID response, even though this was a natural virus. So that's what they're saying in the first sentence on their website. So they're still lying about it.
Well, we heard just a week.
In any case,
just a second. We heard just a week ago official confirmation from Germany, from this secret service. They confirm it that this virus came from a lab in Wuhan, and it's not natural, it's man-made. And now just all mainstream media are now asking questions, how come they knew this from the start? They even mentioned that Chancellor Merkel knew from the start that was the not natural virus, it was made in laboratory.
Yes. So as you can see, now the intelligence services, both in the US and in Germany, are in disagreement with NATO, who still claims that this was a natural virus. In fact, on their task force webpage, the first sentence, it says it's a natural occurring virus. In any case, so both of these narratives are false, but let's leave it for now. But in any case, it's very clear that the US government and all the other global governments at the time in early 2020 organized themselves for war. So they reacted to this as if it was a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear attack. And in the US and in all these other countries that we've profiled so far, the laws were invoked in secrecy without telling to the public. They've invoked the laws that relate to a global scale attack with chemical, radiological, biological, and nuclear weapons. And this legal framework essentially subverts normal constitutional governance in the US and in other countries, suspends the Bill of Rights, if in those countries that have it. But in any case, so it suspends any democratic normal governance and introduces a set of military laws, which have been in operation since 2020, and now in the US are going to continue at least until end of 2029. So in the US, this was declared by Public Health Emergency Declaration, Stafford Act Declaration by President Trump, which has never been done in all 50 states simultaneously. So Stafford Act Declaration is a declaration of emergency, but it's designed for specific locations. And all the laws that I'm mentioning here that has to do with the CBRN attacks, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear attacks, they're also all designed for very short-term, very severe events, and usually those events are highly localized. So for example, even when the nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it did not result in all Japan emergency. It was, or definitely not global emergency. It was only a local event in those two cities. And this is how chemical and biological attacks also happen. They're also always localized. So neither chemical nor biological weapons can travel very far. They're always localized. And for this reason, these laws were designed to deal with a local emergency for short duration. Remember, they told us 2 weeks to
flatten the
curve, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have
this is how all of these.
You have chronology. That was called PrEP Act. What was imposed when?
So the PrEP Act in the US, the PrEP Act declaration was made by HHS Secretary at the time, Alex Azar, and so Health and Human Services Secretary. So the law says that he has unilateral authority to issue a PrEP Act declaration. PrEP Act is a Pandemic Emergency Preparedness Act. It was put in place in 2005, and it's designed for these kinds of, ostensibly was designed and justified to Congress for short-term, very severe attacks, like somebody attacks us with nuclear weapons. We have to act quickly, and importantly, this PrEP Act allows for use of countermeasures, medical countermeasures. And medical countermeasures are all sorts of medical products that can be used in this short-term emergency, basically without testing, something new, maybe something is existing, some existing drug, but it's used in a different indication, a different form, or different dosage. And we don't have enough time to test for safety and efficacy, but we need something to deal with the emergency quickly. and we also don't have ability to, we don't want to expose people who are just trying to help and trying to mitigate this quickly. We don't want to expose them to liability threats. And so the PrEP Act, importantly, suspends all or provides full liability immunity to what's so-called covered persons who are using covered countermeasures during this short-term severe emergency. And of course, none of this can be mandated. So it's only supposed to be something offered to people for severe situations. But what is happening now, as you can see, the PrEP Act has been recently extended. This declaration has been extended by outgoing HHS Secretary Javier Becerra to last until the end of 2029. And so far, RFK Jr., the new HHS Secretary, has not terminated it, although the law says that he has unilateral authority to do so.
Yeah, that's
and
strange.
So that remains a big problem.